Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. This is the last of 4 Tuesday town halls. And thank you to everyone who has faithfully attended all. And welcome to all newcomers who are joining us tonight. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional homelands of the indigenous peoples of Chicago, to bring more understanding to their territories which we are in. Chicago is the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. Other tribes like the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox also called this area home. Located at the intersection of several great waterways, the land naturally became a site of travel and healing. And this is still the land and home of the Chicago Native American, and it's the 6th largest urban Indian community that still practices its heritage, traditions, and care for the land and waterways. The 65,000 Native Cook County residents are now asking our Cook County commissioners for recognition. Edgewater Environmental Council supports Resolution 210565 for Indigenous People Day to replace Columbus Day, and supports Resolution 210597 requiring a land acknowledgement like this that we are giving before meetings. And in the chat, you can see information to ask your state rep and senator and Cook County board to say yes to these. And please send, if you feel moved to send a message before May 24th's open hearing. Now, Town Hall Tuesdays are organized with 6018 North and EEC, and they are supported by a COVID response grant from the Environmental Law and Policy Center. A big thanks to Howard Lerner and Linda Lipton. A little bit about EEC, Edgewater Environmental Coalition. We're 100% volunteer driven, located on the north side in the Edgewater neighborhood, and that includes the 40th, 48th, and 49th wards. EEC was founded over a decade ago and has grown into a solution-driven coalition of community members and environmental stewards. We bring a green voice to local challenges, and we empower people to build and maintain a more sustainable future through action, organizing, education, and advocacy. Most of all, we are an open door. So we welcome you to join us at our virtual monthly meetings and our events like this. And tonight is the 4th and last, as I mentioned in the beginning, the 4th and last of our town halls. Thank you all for being here. Our focus tonight is transportation. Each of these town halls ask the following questions. Where are we now? What can we do in 2021? And what can we do long-term? Our tonight's session will begin with our experts, followed by Renee moderating a Q&A, and then we'll move into our innovators section, and we'll end with any questions or the questions you may have. The town hall team is Renee Patton, me, and Killian Walsh, and along with our amazing tech team, Maddie Kane and Nathan Smith. Please chat, please ask any questions to Maddie and Nathan if you have any tech issues. Now, without further ado, let's dive in with Vignesh Krishnamurthy from CDOT, that's Chicago's Department of Transportation, who will give us the lay of the land. Thank you, Vig, for being here. And Renee will be jumping in to keep time.
Great. Thank you, Tricia. Good evening, everyone. Nice to meet all of you virtually. My face looks familiar to any of you. We may have ran into each other in the street. I'm also a Edgewater resident of the 1300 block of Elmdale. So happy to be here, both as a member of the neighborhood and as a representative of Chicago Department of Transportation. So I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Project Development at CDOT, and that encompasses a whole variety of things that I think would be interesting to this group. Neighborhood traffic design, so our traffic calming programs, our efforts to pedestrianize and make streets safer for all people, but particularly people walking around the neighborhood. Our Complete Streets program, which is a more comprehensive effort of retrofitting and redesigning streets, with an emphasis on sort of what you could call the traditionally forgotten modes over the 20th century of walking, biking, all manners of rolling, scooters, skateboards, unicycles, every day something new, and of course, buses and public transit, streetscapes and plaza streets, which are efforts to really recognize how our streets, which represent 30% of the land area in the city of Chicago, are more than just a conduit from getting to A to B, but really are the tissue that connects all the other activities in the city. That the private and public land of the city is intersected by streets and connected by streets. And so streets are a place for gathering, dining out, meeting your friends, socializing, sitting, recreating. And that's what that program is there. Bike shares, of course, our divvy system, which is continually expanding further and further to be citywide very soon. And then, of course, e-scooter pilots, which were done in 2019 and 2020 citywide last summer. Bicycle parking, review of private sector development and everything that kind of comes on the land development side, looking at that from the transportation perspective. Our street tree program, green jobs training, transportation planning and studies. Vision Zero, which is kind of an international movement to recognize and take a pledge that to eliminate all traffic crashes that have serious injuries or fatalities to zero. So it's sort of an ethos to say, these aren't accidents, but these are traffic crashes that are preventable. And how do we look at making our streets safer, from the bottom up as a public health challenge with 35,000 to 40,000 people annually dying in the United States on our streets in traffic crashes, and right-of-way policy, which encompasses everything from when there is development or reconfiguration of the city's street network. Where do the streets go? What are they named? How should they be laid out? So given the topic and nature of this group, I wanted to provide two views on environment. And so when we think of environment and transportation, there are three big areas of intersection. All transportation systems need a vehicle, and sometimes that vehicle is just your own body that's walking. All transportation systems need a propulsion source, an energy source to move us. And then they need something to operate on: streets, tracks, airways in the case of aviation. And so the big areas then of environmental intersection really are on the energy side, with air emissions related to that energy source. What is it that's creating propulsion? But then on the right-of-way side, right? What is the footprint and land impact? As I mentioned earlier, 30% of our city of Chicago, the land area, is taken up by streets and sidewalks and related infrastructure. So on the left here is sort of the traditional view. If we look at total greenhouse gas emissions, and I credit our friends at the Center for Neighborhood Technology for creating these maps, Chicago and the city of Chicago lights up. But if we look at emissions, greenhouse gas emissions per resident, per capita, adjusted for population, our surrounding area, the collar counties of Chicago, light up. And so this is two views about, as cities, we have a huge footprint in terms of the magnitude and a huge part of the climate crisis in terms of the policies and actions that we take as individual citizens, but also city as a regulatory structure and governance structure. But then on the other hand, cities are incredibly efficient when it comes to transportation in terms of what they enable us to do differently than say in the suburbs or beyond the suburbs. So going back to high school algebra, just for fun, if we wanted to think about, how do we wrap our head around this pollution problem or this climate change problem, be it toxic pollution like nitrogen dioxides, sulfur dioxides, or fine particulate matters, or carbon pollution, we can kind of break this down and say that pollution is some equation. It's the amount of pollution per VHT, vehicle hours traveled. So that's actually, I'm just going to skip ahead. That's fuel efficiency. And so there's a whole regulatory enterprise, particularly the federal government with the EPA, working on fuel efficiency. Then there's vehicle hours traveled for vehicle miles traveled. And this is kind of our traditional definition of congestion, meaning, if we're going a given number of miles, I'll use a local example, trying to get to Clark Devon Hardware, how much, and you're driving, because you're going to pick up 50 bags of cement. Well, how long is it taking you, right? Because your car is running, that engine's going, it's polluting. And so this is the traditional congestion piece. Then there's sort of vehicle miles traveled per vehicle. And, I think those of us in the neighborhood know on street sweeping day, you see all those cars that kind of just sit. People have that extra car maybe, or the one car that's for the trip on the weekend or something. And so we can fiddle with how many miles per vehicle. And then there's fundamentally vehicle ownership. So, we look at our neighborhood, which is actually one of the sort of hot spots in the city for low car ownership and zero car households, which you can credit to our kind of abundance of transit infrastructure, the Red Line, the 147, the Clark bus, the 36 bus, and we're kind of surrounded by CTA in the best way possible. And what goes into that in terms of, the choice of to own a car, to not own a car, is so many things: infrastructure, land use patterns, the alternative modes available like divvy, walking, CTA, how attractive are those, how are they priced, how convenient are they? And then of course, income and culture. And this is sort of the lane the project development division really plays in, is in this infrastructure and alternatives part. We really try to not manipulate, but in a good way affect this lever which gets at pollution. So some good news, sometimes we take, traffic, particular automobile traffic, particularly in this neighborhood, we live close to the terminus of Lakeshore Drive, which is sort of this huge regional traffic artery that kind of dumps into Ridge and Hollywood and Bryn Mawr, and kind of take traffic sometimes as a given. But this chart shows what happened at the beginning of the pandemic last year with the stay-at-home order, and then traffic just sort of evaporated. In March of 2020, things dropped down to kind of minus 40% of what they were in the previous year. And throughout 2020, traffic in terms of motor vehicle traffic never really recovered. And I share this to sort of say there's a lot of flexibility, and perhaps a lot more flexibility in the amount of driving we do and where we go than we might think. Granted, this was sort of an unprecedented global, health crisis that precipitated this, but it begs the question of, what is it that we can do that we can change to something that, on a typical daily basis, we think is sort of fundamental. On the other hand,
2-minute warning.
Okay, thanks. Bicycling, it was kind of a banner year for Divvy. Divvy just sort of boomed in popularity, especially through the summer. And so, this chart right there, I think, demonstrates how much and how quickly behavior can change and how we get around changes. So I'm going to fire through some things real quick. What is CDOT doing? A lot of stuff. Over the pandemic last year, we've been developing pop-up bus lanes, rapid delivery treatments across the city, like these bump outs and high visibility crosswalks. We've been running the Shared Streets program to sort of demonstrate that streets should be shared, closing blocks to local traffic only to give people a chance to social distance, but also reimagine what can the street be and how much do we give up for walking and biking versus how much do we dedicate to parking and cars. Outdoor dining, and again, as I said, recognizing the street as a place in and of itself, creating community, creating sustainability for local business, but also creating something that you can walk to in your neighborhood so you don't have to travel a large distance to satisfy your economic, social, and daily needs. Expanding bike share by 50 square miles last year in the e-scooter pilot, which I mentioned. Green infrastructure. And so this is the other piece of transportation, maybe we'll get to it in the Q&A, which is, Chicago is basically built in a swamp. And so we have, many challenges with managing our rainwater, particularly when we have 30% of our city that's paved over with asphalt or concrete for transportation. And then we're kind of, gaining a lot of momentum on electric vehicles as a city as well. And we can talk about that in the Q&A. And then the concluding thing, which you may have heard about in the news yesterday, is the big capital plan, Chicago Works. And so this is the tremendous investment by the people of the city of Chicago into infrastructure. And in terms of the topics that we're talking about today, hundreds of millions of dollars to improve and fix sidewalks, $50 million in our division for complete streets, for bike lanes, bus lanes, pedestrian safety improvements, citywide streetscape program, particularly focused on the south and west side, $6 million for new street trees, planting 12,000 trees across the city, and then 100 green alleys, and new green alleys in every ward, which doesn't sound all that sexy, but those are a place where our green alleys can help with that stormwater issue. If you've ever seen a flooded alley, you can understand the value of this in helping some of that water actually go back into the ground rather than puddle up. So thanks for your time. Looking forward to the Q&A, and I'll pass the baton to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great overview. And I have some questions for you for later. So Julia, you are up next. I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
All right. Can you see my screen and hear me all right?
Yes, there you are. You're good on both fronts.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I am Julia Gerasimenko. I'm the advocacy manager or a advocacy manager at the Active Transportation Alliance, and I'm really pleased to be here this evening with you all. In case you're not familiar with this organization, we are a nonprofit advocacy group working to promote walking, biking, and public transit to create sustainable, healthy, and equitable communities. We believe when we design our world to promote those three ways of getting around, we're really going to transform our communities, our lives for the better. And we are also member-based, and what else? And we're regional, not just in Chicago as well. So some of our kind of guiding principles, we believe mobility equity is fundamental to human and civil rights. We believe in the power of partnership, so partnering with local community groups like EEC, and we believe in internal relationships with elected officials, agency officials, and external pressure is kind of the secret sauce that helps us achieve our goals. Some of our kind of high level goals that every day when we're getting to work, this is what we're thinking about: reducing traffic crashes by 50%. So Vig mentioned Vision Zero is the goal to reduce all serious traffic fatalities and injuries to zero. That's one of our goals as well. And then shifting 50% of all trips made in the metro region to walking, biking, and transit. So I want to point out that, electrification is no panacea to our climate change concerns, right? So by that, I mean, it's not the end all be all. We also need to significantly reduce vehicle miles traveled. Transportation contributes the largest share of carbon emissions in the US. So yes, we need electrification, but we also need to be shifting trips to these other modes that are more sustainable. It's not just about making like electric charging stations for buses and all that, right? We need more. This is a really great report from a national partner, Transportation for America, I'd recommend checking out. So looking at how things are now, obviously data is a little bit delayed. So our regional mode share report from 2020 only has 2018 data, but regionally we're at 16.9%. And this is just commuting to work data, pretty much the best data we have, honestly. For Chicago, it's a bit higher, it's around 35%, but clearly we have a long way to go if we're really looking to put a dent in greenhouse gas emissions. So how do we encourage people to walk, bike, and take transit? A lot of it has to do with infrastructure. It also has to do with a whole host of issues, including things like transit affordability, which I'll get into a little bit later. But these are the types of improvements we could be making to make, for example, bus service a lot more reliable, faster, and when you look at who's riding the bus in Chicago, oftentimes it's lower income folks, people of color. It's gotten really expensive to live by the train. I'm sure you've seen rising rents in Edgewater, right? So improving bus service is really kind of some of the most efficient and equitable means of improving transit there is right now. Vig also mentioned the capital plan. We're pretty excited about that too. We've been hearing a lot of promises for the past few mayoral administrations, right? The last two mayors have promised 150 miles of protected bike lanes, 50 miles of bus lanes. We're only at 28 miles of protected bike lanes and 15 miles of bus lanes. And we're really hoping this capital plan will help reach the goals of the Lightfoot administration. There's 160 million in there for the next 2 years for complete streets improvements like protected bike lanes and bus lanes. So we're really interested in these next recommendations and seeing CDOT kind of adopt more transparency and community accountability in deciding how those capital funds are spent, really focusing on high crash corridors. We have the data, we know where the crashes are happening, jumpstarting progress on protected bike lanes, a true network too, not just piecemeal here and there, and dedicated bus lanes, and making the streetscape work for all people of all mobility. Just another funding stream I want to flag too. The capital plan is going to increase how much every alderman has for what are known as menu funds. I looked into the 48th ward. They do not do what's called participatory budgeting. So that's something you all could maybe advocate around. And unfortunately, even when I was looking at how to make a menu money request in the 48th ward, there wasn't anything on their website. So I recommend just kind of reaching out to their office. What can we do right now? Well, shared streets happened last summer. It was kind of a specific thing in response to social distancing. It looks like CDOT has announced this program will continue, $500,000 allocated to 12 to 13 miles. So again, if you're interested in this, reach out to your alder person. We have some recommendations on how to make shared streets a bit better, but really we're all for the permanent safe infrastructure. And that's what we heard a lot of when we did our targeted survey outreach the first couple of months this year. We'll be putting out a blog in the coming week or so that gets more in depth on that survey work we did on the shared streets program. But really a lot of what we heard is people want the permanent, safe, protected infrastructure. To move back to transit and kind of fares and equity, when you look at what this map shows is community areas and average incomes in those areas and what percent of the average income people are spending on a year-round CTA pass. So this map of Chicago, like any other, shows that the burden is really on lower income folks, people of color, and how can we relieve that burden? Well, we dove into kind of a fair policy analysis in our Fair Chicagoland report we put out, I think in 2018 or 2019. Here are some of those recommendations. We are advocating for a reduced fare for low income folks, implementing something that's called fare capping, where when you're paying as you go, you end up paying more in the end. So if somebody's already paid like $130 for a 30-day pass by day 15, let's say, but they couldn't afford that $130 up front, to have that bump up automatically to a 30-day pass for the rest of those 15 days, decriminalizing fare evasion. So these are all ways that, not to get too far in the weeds, but that we can really affect transit ridership and encourage more riders by implementing, say, free fares for youth. We have also seen how crucial federal funding for transit is. This past year with the pandemic, 50% of all operating revenue for CTA, PACE, and Metra comes from us riders. And when you have a situation from like in the pandemic, when there was this huge drop in ridership, without this federal relief, transit service would have been decimated. We would have seen massive, massive cuts. So looking ahead, for the first time, Active Trans is really doing a lot on the federal level. We're going to continue to push for federal support for operations, not just capital, meaning not just more buses and trains physically, but actually paying transit agencies to provide more service. Also federally, there's been this inequitable split in funding. 80% has gone to highways, 20% has gone to transit since the 80s. This year presents an opportunity to change that legislation to equally fund the two. So stay tuned for action alerts and get to know your congressional representatives. 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, or less, or okay. Yeah. Red and purple modernization. This is something that's happening in your backyard. So I just wanted to flag, this is going to make transit service a lot better. They're going to be able to run more trains more quickly by improving the track. So while it's going to be a lengthy construction process, I hope you guys will hang in there, support your local businesses along the red line. And there's plenty of information on the CTA website about that. And then just also wanted to flag equitable transit-oriented development intersection between housing and transit area. So again, check that out on the CTA website, as well as the city's ETOD plan that we approved earlier this year. Lots of great information around reducing parking minimums and encouraging kind of affordable, family-friendly housing by transit so we can all get those benefits of living in a transit-rich community. And finally, I just want to encourage you all to be your own advocates. We can't do it all. We need your support. So this is just kind of basic framework for how you could build your the secret sauce transportation community and support will, and that's how you really see something come to fruition. So I'm glad to be a resource for you all as you plan your own campaigns. And then this is just a quote I love: power concedes nothing without an organized demand. So just in the spirit of community organizing, and I will leave it at that. Sorry if I went over.
No, you did so good. It was funny because at the end you cut out a little bit, so it sounded like you're talking super fast. It all came through, but it was funny when I was trying to get in there.
Okay.
Thank you. That was adding to Vig. That was such a great overview. And now we're gonna dive into a little bit more specific of topics. And Kassie with Jobs to Move America is up next. Kassie, all yours.
There we go, unmuted.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk a little about Jobs to Move America, and we'll have a little respite from slides because I didn't make slides. So my name's Kassie. I'm the Illinois Director for Jobs to Move America. And we are a national organization kind of built around this idea of procurement for the common good. And this might sound familiar. We've heard of bargaining for the common good and some of these other ideas where there's power and leverage that can be kind of reimagined and reused to create good outcomes for workers and for community members, and particularly folks who've previously been left behind. So I'm going to talk a little about that today, and I promise it does matter for transportation. The government at all levels spends about $2 trillion in contracts on goods and services each year. $2 trillion is a lot of money. And we work to make sure that as governments and agencies are spending money, that they're attaching good jobs and equity standards to them. And I don't think this is a crazy idea, but the idea that this is our money, it's public money, and it can be used as we're putting it back into the economy, that we're attaching some strings and not just giving away the house to contractors, which has happened a lot. There are numerous examples that I'm sure you could kind of think of off the top of your head even. So what Jobs to Move America has done, and what we continue to work on, is kind of making sure this good jobs and equity policy, we call it the US Employment Plan, I have a fact sheet, that we are implementing this good jobs and equity plan at all major transportation agencies. So we have teams that work with LA Metro, New York Metro, I think they just call it Metro, and Chicago, which are the 3 largest transportation agencies in the country. And as we are adding these good job standards and these equity standards to their procurements, because they buy a lot of stuff, it's raising standard in the manufactured goods arena. And I'll make that a little bit more concrete in a second. And kind of, so the US Employment Plan, just to talk a little more about it. So typically, I know CTA best, so I'm going to talk about CTA. CTA, when they're going to buy a bus, a bunch of buses usually, or a bunch of trains, typically they're going to put on an RFP, a request for proposals, for bidders to submit. They're typically going to ask, hey bidder, what's the timeline you can do this in? How much is it going to cost? What's the managerial style? Not sure why that's important, but they ask it. And what is the the tech, obviously. how nice, how advanced, how fancy is the thing you're going to build. So all good stuff to know. We want to know all of that stuff. What we do is add an additional category. So we're asking about timeline, tech, managerial style, and price still. And we're adding this US employment plan policy, or US employment plan question, which asks bidders to say, how many jobs are you going to create? What are the types of jobs? Where are they going to be? What are the wages and the benefits of the jobs? What is your commitment to recruiting marginalized workers who haven't always had access to manufacturing careers? What is your plan to partner with unions or other groups that have training programs, registered apprenticeships or training programs? And what kind of upgrades or investments are you making in domestic manufacturing facilities? So it adds a lot more information. And when CTA is looking at which bus we're going to buy or which trains we're going to buy, they have a more accurate, bigger picture of not only what types of vehicles are we going to get, but how are they being made and who are they being made by. One big important thing to remember here is manufacturers, people who get public contracts have a lot of times kind of said, we're going to do all this good stuff, don't worry about it, and aren't necessarily held accountable to those commitments they've made. A big difference here is once the contract is accepted, the bid is accepted by CTA, all of that jobs and equity commitment that they've made become part of the binding contract. So manufacturers are held accountable to the number of marginalized workers that they've committed to recruiting and training. The same they would be for kind of the types of brakes they're putting on a bus or the timeline that they've said. So if they fall down on the job, there is potential ramifications, including penalties, liquidated damages, and if things are really, really awry, terminating a contract altogether. So it's a pretty big, a big change in how we think about procurement, but what it does is it adds kind of the benefits that we know workers and communities need to the equation. So it's not just like, are we getting a nice bus? It's, are we getting a nice bus and are the people building it being treated respectfully and having access to good jobs and training and all of that they need. Why does this matter to folks who are interested in the environment? I mean, public transit, obviously good, we love it. But we know right now there's a huge opportunity as CTA and cities and everywhere is making investments in electric vehicles that we have a chance to get in on the ground floor and make sure these are good jobs from the get-go. Sometimes folks think, oh, these are fancy batteries, these are fancy buses, they're just going to be good jobs. Manufacturing has always been good jobs, and that's just not the case. One of our offices is in Alabama because there's a manufacturer there, kind of a low road manufacturer that has built a lot of buses for CTA and done it in a way where folks are not making very good money, are not getting the benefits that you would expect from a manufacturer, and where there's also documented racism, sexism, all the bad isms that go alongside kind of these manufacturers that don't have a lot of accountability. So that's a huge thing. We know that we need to steer business toward good manufacturers who are not only going to build really nice electric buses, but going to make, you know, communities and workers better off. So we know electric buses are coming. We know electric school buses are becoming increasingly a part of the picture. And we also know, we talk about electric vehicles a lot, but they're really relatively new, especially in the US. And we can, as the public sector is directing money toward this technology and making these investments, we know that the public sector follows and that it really matters for all of us. If we go out to Chicago Ave right now, there's a good chance we'll see one of 6 electric buses that CTA bought relatively recently. And that really matters in building out that infrastructure, in kind of promoting the idea of zero emissions vehicles, that these are like real things that can actually work for people's lives. So that's very exciting. So kind of zooming into CTA with my last few minutes, we know CTA has generally been pretty good at adding this good jobs and equity policy, and that's great. But so far it's been on a one-off basis. So the first time they used it was in 2016, way back when, to buy 846 rail cars, which led to a new manufacturing facility on the southeast side of Chicago. Those trains are actually just last week went into revenue testing, which means there is a good chance if you are on the blue line, you might be on a brand new train that was built by Chicagoans, which is very exciting. We also know that they used the U.S. employment plan, that good jobs and equity tool, for their most recent, unfortunately, diesel bus procurement. It's about a third of the overall fleet that they're looking to replace. They have very old buses and they needed to replace them. So it's obviously we would have preferred electric buses, and we worked with actually some of the folks on this call to try to get them to reconsider buying so many diesel buses. But at very least, we know that our public money buying these buses for our community are going to help generate good jobs for folks.
You wanted to share, you have a little bit of time left. So I wanted to
I sure do.
Cool.
So for folks who are interested in helping us move from this one-off, whenever CTA feels like doing a procurement and adding good jobs and equity to the picture, we're working with them to make it a standing policy. Every time a big contract is coming around, they apply the U.S. employment plan. So for folks who are interested in signing on to that letter, I'm dropping a link in the chat, which has the text to the letter and allows organizations to sign on to support having a permanent U.S. employment plan policy, and which we calculate can support up to 19,000 good jobs throughout the economy. So big deal, big game changer, especially when it's in conjunction with all of these other major transit agencies. And if folks have questions, I'll be happy to answer them later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kassie. From some of our previous town halls, we have joined letters from hearing about them on the calls. So we'll be able to talk to our organization about this for sure. And hopefully other people that are involved in organizations, other speakers check it out as well. Okay, Courtney, you are up next. And I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Courtney Cobbs. I'm with Better Street Chicago. I am one of 4 co-founders of Better Street Chicago. And the reason why I keep looking down is because I am about to share my screen. If I hadn't already mentioned, I do live on the far north side, so I'm very familiar with Edgewater. I lived there for 3 years, and I've been in Rogers Park for about 4. I primarily get around by bike, so most of my presentation will be about biking on the far north side and what we can do to make it a viable option for more people. It is important to note that half of all the car trips in Chicago are less than 5 miles. That is not a very long distance if you're someone who is able-bodied to get on a bike. Plenty of my neighbors are right on the edge of Evanston. There's a Trader Joe's about 2.5 miles from my apartment. And plenty of my neighbors drive their SUVs to Trader Joe's and get out a bag or 2 of groceries. I understand on a systemic level why this is the way that it is. And there's more that we can do to make biking a viable option. One of those tools is traffic diverters. CDOT tried out traffic diverters a few years ago in the Ravenswood Manor neighborhood. And because drivers who are able to press the gas pedal and go from 0 to 60 were very upset that they could not turn down a particular street because there was so much uproar, CDOT decided to remove the traffic diverters. Traffic diverters are important because they divert car traffic. If a street has too much car traffic, it is unattractive and in some ways dangerous for many people to bike on it. And so you calm traffic by reducing the amount of people who can drive on a street. And as you can see in the photo, these are what traffic diverters look like in Portland and in Berkeley. I would love if we had more of these on the far north side and they were colorful and full of greenery and all these things that make them lovely. Another traffic diverter, I forget which city this is in, but I love the colors and the sign that says, you know, no entering unless you're on a bike. Another image of a traffic diverter, this one is integrated into the sidewalk. So folks who are on a bike are elevated and they can go against traffic on this residential street. If you are on the far north side, you're probably very familiar with Glenwood. Glenwood between Foster and Hollywood is one way for drivers. But as you get closer and closer to, well, actually, let me back up. Once you pass Hollywood, there's less traffic calming for a few blocks. And I'm going to mention that specific area later in my presentation. But I've heard it from several people that the further north you go, the less traffic calming, the less attractive it is to get on a bike. Here in Rogers Park, along Glenwood and Greenview, I regularly encounter drivers who are upset that I'm not up against a parked vehicle where someone could open their door and door me and cause me to flip off my bike and seriously injure myself. And the road is very narrow. I've actually driven down that road in a vehicle. And once I did that, I was like, oh, now I kind of understand. And I understand that the street needs to be a one-way as opposed to a two-way. If someone's in a large SUV, they're occupying more of the space. I've seen vehicles almost hit each other. I've seen drivers almost hit people who are rollerblading and roller skating in the street. It's just terrible. So one thing that I am advocating for with Maria Haddon in the 49th Ward is to make Glenwood between Pratt and Devon a one-way and to install a traffic diverter that would allow people on bike to travel a little bit more calmly between Pratt and Devon. I didn't think to share this, but something that we have in the 49th Ward is a bike incident report. And I was told by Maria that CDOT will be analyzing the data. So if you ever have an experience in the 49th Ward where you're like, that wasn't cool, like a driver cuts you off or honks at you or just whatever, you can submit the incident and say what the solution would be. So you can say, I would like Glenwood between Pratt and Devon to be a one-way. I would like a traffic diverter. I would like more traffic calming along this stretch. Raised crosswalks. There are plenty of streets that could benefit from raised crosswalks. Particularly in Edgewater, I'm thinking about Bryn Mawr between Glenwood and Clark. It's right by Pierce Elementary School, and plenty of people fly down that hill, or they drive down it like it's a one-way and try to play chicken with people who are on bikes. I say that from personal experience. And I personally believe that every school, every street that a school is located on should have traffic calming. Here in Rogers Park, you can pass by our elementary school and the high school, and there's absolutely no traffic calming on these streets. And it makes no sense that our streets are not safe enough and calm enough for children to bike and walk to school. In this particular image, this is a chicane. I hope I'm saying that correctly. C-H-I-C-A-N-E, if you want to look up some examples yourself. These cause drivers to kind of, basically you can't be on your phone if you're going down a street like this. You actually have to pay attention. And so I would love to see chicanes come to the far north side and be plentiful across the city. This is another image of a chicane using plastic materials. Yeah, they're great. They're fantastic. I would love some of them. A bike counter. I would love to see how many people are using the Glenwood Greenway so that we can go to our alder people or the city and be like, hey, there's been a massive increase in the amount of people biking and we deserve better infrastructure. I personally do not believe speed humps are bike infrastructure. They're actually car infrastructure. I don't use the Glenwood, and thank you, Renee. I don't use the Glenwood Greenway and Edgewater because the speed humps are too rough. I'm often carrying groceries and I don't want to come home with like bruised bananas or broken eggs or things like that because of speed humps that were installed for drivers. All right, bike parking, secure bike storage. E-bike usage in Chicago has soared. Lots of people bought e-bikes during the pandemic. I was out today and just casually noticed a couple people with e-bikes, and they're not, let me back up. So if you were to spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on an e-bike, you would probably want a secure place to park it. And I believe that our public streets that we all pay for should be the place for it. And the city should install secure bike storage in the same place. My neighbor who has a BMW gets to park their vehicle out on the street and keep it there for days and weeks and months. Someone actually did that over the winter from late January until mid-March, didn't move a single inch. And I think there are more productive uses for our streets, like you see here in Barcelona. This is a Barcelona superblock. Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward is actually supportive of this kind of concept coming to Chicago. And this is where, so on some streets, there is no through traffic. And on others, it's just residents and deliveries. And cars can still go down these streets, but they do not dominate. They do not make people feel unsafe. You actually have to drive very slowly. I think this particular super block, no one can drive down it. But look at people out. This is how you meet your neighbors. You form connections. I would love to see this by Pierce Elementary and kind of close off Bryn Mawr between Broadway and Clark and make it a pedestrian and bike only street. I think we'd be just fine with that, and we could divert the traffic to Peterson. Another look at Barcelona superblocks. If you're super interested to see it in action, there are a couple videos on YouTube. I was going to share one, but I don't have time. But I really love this video. It's like less than 5 minutes and it's awesome. Oh no, don't start. Okay, just gonna wrap it up. Some possible locations for interventions. Victoria and Broadway, if you're familiar, I would love to see that closed off and have like a pedestrian plaza. I mentioned Bryn Mawr from Broadway to Clark. Granville, it's supposedly a bike route, but the experiences I have had on Granville, I rarely bike on that street. We could have a traffic diverter, expand the sidewalk in front of the elementary school, calm that street down between Broadway and Clark. Glenwood between Ardmore and Thorndale, a traffic diverter, or closing it to make it bikes and pedestrian only. It's very narrow and there's absolutely no traffic calming. And over the fall, a driver almost pinned me to another car because he swerved over to avoid someone opening their door because the street is very narrow. So instead of braking, he almost ran into me. Conversations that change minds. Did you know that half of all car trips in Chicago are 5 miles or less? Small trips should be safe, accessible, and direct for biking and transit. Pedestrian and biking improvements are accessible infrastructure. You might get people who are like, what about people with disabilities? Well, lots of people with disabilities rely on paratransit or buses. Our buses are stuck in traffic. Is that fair to people with disabilities who cannot drive? Because there are plenty of people with disabilities that can't drive. And there are plenty of people with disabilities for whom biking is a mobility aid.
Courtney, I was going to say, I feel like you could talk with that slide for like an hour on all those points.
Thank you for having me. And if you want to stay in touch and work together to get these improvements, there's my info.
Thank you so much. All those pictures were great to see. Okay, Deloris, we're bringing you on. Deloris is having, gonna see if we can get her working. Asking you to unmute, Deloris. And Maddie, you can pull up her slides as we get this going. while we are working on getting Deloris up, Courtney had that question about where do you want to see some diverters or shared streets? So maybe pop those in the chat. We can do a.
Hello.
There you are. Hello.
I'm on my home phone. I don't have the presentation again. I can start clicking, but I fear something would happen.
Why don't you just talk to us? We have your pictures, and we will scroll through your pictures and your flyers as you're sharing with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. All you then. Introduce yourself, and I'm turning it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deloris Lucas, the founder of We Keep You Rollin'. That's how I introduced the group so that I could get some attention on cycling. And We Keep You Rollin' is located on the far south side of Chicago. We're in an area that is sort of secluded from the city. And as you can see from the slide, our mission is to help create a more livable, sustainable, vibrant community. We want more people to ride bikes, walk more, just to be more active. And we position ourselves to help our residents work on their quality of life. And we work through our underserved communities, and we try to reach everybody where they're at through recreational projects, field trips, and eco tours on bikes.
Deloris, I just want to tell you we can actually see you on video, so you can give us a wave. Just wanted to make sure you knew we could see you.
Well, why can't I see me other than a dot? You know, that's technology. That's not fair. But anyway, I'm reading from my information sheet, which is the slides that you're reading from. It just surmises what we do at We Keep You Rollin'. You know, we have pop-up events where we pop up and talk about bike safety and give away helmets and other bike tools like horns, safety vests, helmets, anything that is biking related. We also do field trips to our neighboring Big Marsh Bike Park and other places to enlighten our neighbors that really don't get out of our little niche. We do service projects where we support the schools and our partners doing just about anything. So we have been extremely successful year after year because we have some excellent partners and sponsors that really like what we're doing and they want to support us any way possible. So every year we have an annual bike ride, and that has participation has increased year after year. What you're looking at on the left is the 5th annual Legacy Bike Ride, where we were riding the electric divvy bikes. Those bikes were first introduced in the city of Chicago at our events. We are pleased that we partner with Divvy. We have a great relationship where they know every time Ms. Lucas asks for loaner bikes, we want the electric bikes so that we could teach the residents what it feels like to ride an e-bike and what it takes to borrow one. On the right is me at a new Divvy bike station on the far south side in Golden Gate Park. I'm so lucky. I live directly adjacent to Golden Gate Park, so I'm so pleased. This station came about because CDOT and Divvy had they rolled out the far south side Divvy bike expansion. So I was lucky enough to suggest many locations and lucky enough to get one put in the park right next to my house. So that's me showing off on one of those bikes. Next slide. Any other photos of us? Last year, we had the pleasure of having Tony Preckwinkle visit our bike ride. As you see, she's there with our partners, the Forest Preserve, a lot of the We Keep You Rolling safety ambassadors, and others had participated. And as I say, every year it gets bigger and bigger. This year, we had the pleasure of working with electric cargo bikes. And that picture is shown on the right-hand side. That is the GSD Turn electric cargo bike. It's big, it's beautiful, it's bold, and it can do just about anything. We Keep You Rolling members and friends had the pleasure of working with the Golden Gate Homeowners Association over the summer to deliver food boxes to our neighborhood, especially seniors. And those cargo bikes were very helpful in delivering some of those goods. And I may be letting some of the cat out the bag, but Miss Lucas is a senior. I just turned 65. So I am trying to make sure that our seniors are serviced and are concentrating on their wellness. So programming will lean more towards seniors and engaging them in activities. We got interviewed by the Bulletin newspaper, and they highlighted us showing some of the work that we did with the food baskets, and it was very successful, and I hope we get a chance to do it again. But it was a lot of work, I want to tell you that. It's always good and so helpful to have volunteers that will show up and show out and do anything you need done. So we always want to increase our volunteer base by telling people and inviting the youth to participate. The other photos you've seen are prior years of our legacy bike ride. We always stop in the Forest Preserve, Bobian Woods. There is a beautiful boat launch over there, and that's where we stop and have a break and take our group picture. So we are so happy that we've continuously grown. Upper left picture is when we partnered with Divvy and we had the old Divvy bikes show up at our events. Well, nowadays, the electric bikes are the black bikes that you may see rolling around in the city. So if you ever see one parked on the north side, you might want to give it a try because it's a dream to ride. On the right-hand side, we did a field trip to Big Marsh, and that's our group picture. We had a We Keep You Rolling Day in which some of our volunteers came and brought their families, and we had an excellent time. We had the whole Big Marsh to ourselves, so we were doing a lot of bike riding there. I just want to mention that our location is so secluded, but yet we are so close to Major Taylor Bike Trail as well as the CalSag Bike Trail. But because of our location, it's not safe for us to bike to either one of those locations. We don't have bike trails, protected lanes, anything close by us. So throughout my years of advocating with CDOT and with Active Trans and with the Southside Trailblazers, we all are on the same page of trying to make it safer for us to ride bikes from our neighborhood to connect to other neighborhoods. So that's a big issue with We Keep You Rolling. We want to connect to the other communities safely, and we do that by telling everybody how we should be biking together and safety gear, et cetera, et cetera. But our main need and request with the city, CDOT, and all those that be, that we should have protected bike lanes that will connect us to, for example, the Major Taylor Bike Trail. It's less than a mile from our community. And we
Deloris,
also
so 1 minute left for whatever you want to tie up with.
Okay, we want to connect to the Cal-Sag bike trail. It's about 4 blocks from our neighborhood. This year we're doing something a little different. We're rolling it all the way back, and we're going to be teaching some of our residents that don't know how to ride a bike, teaching them how to ride a bike. It's something that we had never done before. So this year we'll be teaching kids how to ride as well as adults. And we're partnering with 2 new partners, REI, that's the outdoor equipment people, as well as Illinois Rides. So we look forward to doing that in the coming months, May, June, or July. And to end the season, we're going to have our 6th annual We Keep You Rollin' Legacy Bike Ride on July the 31st. I don't know if you have those slides, just merely inviting you to participate in those events. And we are also in the midst of summing up our flyers for Learn How to Ride a Bike and the Legacy Bike Ride. We are closing out the season asking for help to help us pay for those electric turn bikes. We borrowed them from July, and we're in a position to purchase 2 of them. So we have reached the halfway mark for our fundraiser. That should close probably, I'm going to say, till we reach the $5,000 mark. So any support you can give on our quest to purchase 2 new electric cargo bikes to add to our fleet of bikes, it would be very helpful. And we also use those bikes to give eco tours on bikes, where we invite people to visit the neighborhood, and we tour them around. You can bring your own bike, and or I'll be having the electric divvy bikes on those eco tours. So if anyone is interested in participating, my information will be shared in the slides, and I'll be happy to show you the community.
Thank you so much. I think we need to get a Far North Side contingent to do an extra long ride, come down to you for that July day.
That would be nice. Or I can bring the electric divvy loaner bike, so you don't have to overtax yourself.
Yeah.
We will have those bikes available to you.
Yeah, those are nice. Okay, so now for all the people that just spoke, feel free to come off mute. We're gonna talk with each other and continue this conversation. So my first question actually kind of builds off the conversation. I'm not sure who was doing it in the chat, but was having in the chat about how there is both public opinion and then the things that maybe the studies and the things show that are needed for safe streets, and where that balance is between community input and what the experts know is safe, and then linking that to what Vig was talking about the capital improvements. So I'm just like, where was I going with that? So Vig, I had a question for you that was like, or maybe Julia, maybe you know, because you mentioned it as well, like with the capital plan and the execution from that, like how can organizations work together? How is CDOT going to work with organizations like the ones on this call to build on that plan?
Sure, I can go first. Yeah. So within the capital plan, I'd say there's 2-3 major like conceptual branches of work. And one of them are, what I would call like data-driven and need-based, repair, replace, invest type of projects. So this is the bucket for everything from street resurfacing to increasing and fixing our lights, to our green alleys, to all those things that we know are, beyond proven, much of which is, you could say, backlog work or getting ahead of the backlog work and looking at data to inform, looking at the condition of the infrastructure, the community context, where investments have been made in past, and prioritizing those tools or whichever you want to call it, like bringing those puzzle pieces into the right of way in a systematic way. The second piece is really where there's much more community work and consultation and CDOT partnership in developing, what ought to be. So the 9 streetscape projects that we're launching this year for Design Start for the Invest Southwest program, that is sort of a totally co-created process. CDOT, facilitates the conversation with the community, with professional services companies like architects and engineers and artists to come and say, okay, 79th Street or whatever the street is, let's have a conversation, right? What are the goals? What are the values? What types of features would we want to prioritize in this, and develop a design with consultation and participation all the way through. That's the same approach, as Deloris sort of actually, thank you, alluded to with the divvy system expansion. A lot of work with the ward, with the community, with organizations like these in the areas where divvy is expanding to allow people to help teach us, right? We can't be everywhere. And so we need the eyes and ears and input and local knowledge of groups who are going to be ultimately the, stewarding the system and using the system to help identify the locations for stations. It's the same approach with our bike network planning this year, kind of done in tandem with the areas where we're expanding divvy, using small neighborhood councils to help inform what are the origins and destinations that people are trying to get to, which types of facilities would actually support cycling as a daily activity in the neighborhood and build the culture up. And so there is kind of quite a lot, I would say, of opportunity and project development and co-collaborative project development processes. Not to mention also the Vision Zero. We're starting up new planning processes for the Northwest side and South side for our Vision Zero program, which I mentioned, which again is a community-based process to identify locations of interest. What are the pain points? What strategies and tools should we bring forward first? So we do a lot and have a lot of conduits for people to participate, which we're really excited about and need this input, quite honestly, because that also helps legitimize the investments, but also make them better because they're informed by people who live, work, shop, dine, recreate in the community.
Yeah, Courtney or Julie, anything to add to that based on what you were chatting about in the chat? Or based on your experience working with CDOT or other partners?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I would like to see a difference in terms of how CDOT evaluates the feedback. My perception is that if enough drivers complain, the improvements won't happen. But like if a child who lives on the street is like, hey, I want traffic calming because, I want to be able to go outside and bike with my friends without fear, whatever. I just think there needs to be a rework of how they're evaluating the feedback. Like a child's feedback should be weighted more heavily than someone who's in an air-conditioned vehicle and can take the next street without any issue versus people who are going 1 to 3 miles out of their way so that they can get home without being injured or killed. Like we're looking at 2 different things, safety versus like convenience. And I think a lot of times the feedback that they're getting from drivers is based on convenience, or this is the way I've always drove in this neighborhood versus I'm just trying to get home to my cats. I want to live. I'm 30. I want to live to see 80. And some days I'm like, is that going to happen? Am I going to make it home? And I don't know if CDOT like fully grasps that, but I also know that aldermanic prerogative is at play as well. So sometimes they're not empowered to do the right thing or the safest thing because their hands are sort of like tied. And like, how do we overcome that? How can we as advocates help change that policy? The fact that a certain amount of people on the street have to say yes to traffic calming, when I think it should be the opposite. You need to prove to me why we don't need it.
Yeah, we actually experienced something like that with Glenwood being a shared street during the pandemic. And that leads me, and Julia and Deloris and Kassie all talk about partnerships that they have that are so crucial in the work that they do. And like EEC, we're like an all volunteer small organization, but we want to see these sustainable transportation things happen in our community. So from those of you that have been successful on these projects, like what advice do you have for EEC or for other small volunteer community organizations that really want to bring these to our communities, these new cool things that Courtney talked about,
Oddly enough, I just want to say following up is so important, because if you don't, they won't. So it wears you down a bit to keep asking and keep bringing it up and may rename it. But following up on whatever you want and what the need might be is key. And then grab a few people with you along the way so that they're supporting the same concern. I've been doing this advocating for 10 years, and it started with a walkability audit on 130th Street. And I'm still advocating, even though we've had an excellent Riverdale multimodal transportation plan that gave some excellent suggestions, but nothing has been implemented. So where's the accountability? And I don't know where it's at. It's not over here, but I keep asking about it. So, staff changes. I don't know what you do with the city, Vig, but, I need some help in just moving it around. Maybe it's not getting to the right ear. And then when it does get to the right ear, how far do they champion the issue, or does it sit again? So the key is to follow up and ask again and keep it going. Courtney, I really want to reach out to you and do something that I don't even know if it exists, a bikeability audit. We do walkability audits. We know what it's like, bikeability, but to actually document it and have something like that on the records.
And I think it would be different for someone with a disability, someone with a young child. Like the way I see it and the way I experience it, I can have those things in mind, but it's not my day-to-day lived. I don't see it that way 24/7, 365.
Okay. So that's another way to document it. You include those people at their ability, and include someone with a stroller and or electric chair. Speaking of the electric chair, they're riding them in the streets because there are no sidewalks. There are no laws telling them they can't, but they don't see any other way to get around other than being in the street, challenging a vehicle and at the mercy of a understanding driver to share the road. I feel so bad when I see that. And it may be something that's being looked at that I don't know about, but Julia, Courtney, the disabilities group, maybe we could get together and do some type of a conference to see where we're at on some of those issues, what they're working on, and how we can support them. I don't know, this was great conversation to have.
Well, that actually leads me to one of my other questions. So just like everybody, I want everybody to get a chance to chime in before we move on to the innovators. So like that was super cool. Like, I don't know how many like transportation experts or transportation advocates are like all in the same digital room together outside of like, big conferences or something that used to happen. So we heard from other town halls that it's actually kind of like unique and special that all of us are in the same space together talking about this. So one of two questions to answer, like, did you learn something from another presenter or something that you're going to take away to your own work? Or is there something you want to share that's the low hanging fruit that's just like a final call out to people as we tie up this portion?
I want to key into more traffic calming tools. So, excuse me, Courtney, Julia, I'm sure there's some new things out there. Maybe we could try something in my community that'll bring light to us being able to get around better.
I'll chime in. There are some bike audit tools I can share with y'all that are out there. Nothing too great, but yeah, I'll be sure to share those. One thing that came to mind, inspired by Courtney's presentation as well, love all the colors, love all the greenery and all that creativity. It reminded me of what's in jeopardy though, which is there is this larger system of, and maybe Vig can speak to this as well, this kind of engineering Bible that all kind of street interventions have to kind of go by. And so there's an opportunity to make your voice heard and kind of share your thoughts on what this kind of manual should include. So I'm dropping this whole thing in the chat. You have until May 14th. For example, something like a crosswalk that's painted a rainbow will no longer be recommended. So if you are interested in having things where what sometimes referred to as tactical urbanism, or just kind of this more experimental kind of street design and infrastructure, this new update is kind of making that more difficult to experiment with these different designs. And while I think we can all appreciate that uniformity is really important, right, to a certain extent, but I think we can also all agree that a rainbow crosswalk shouldn't really be too controversial. So
I love rainbow crosswalks. Kassie, I want to make sure we get your voice in. Any low-hanging fruit or something you learned that you're taking away?
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit is that link I already dropped. So for folks who are part of organizations that are interested in jobs, equity, public transit, or procurement, feel free to sign your organization on. Other than that, you know, JMA is working on in a kind of different space than a lot of folks, but what I hear is, you know, lots of good folks who are kind of, you know, beating at the door trying to make things happen. And I really appreciated that that call for follow-up. I'm a former labor organizer, and so it's always about building a list and following up. And I think I'm really happy to hear other organizations talking about that. That's fantastic, and that persistence and making those connections and then making something with those connections is how we make change. So,
thank you. That was
really
great
to hear.
If any of you have any other tying up comments, but then if not, we'll move on to the innovators and hear the cool things they're doing. Cool.
Can I just chime in one last thought? One thing we've been trying to encourage CDOT to adopt is a racial equity impact assessment. And that really begs the question of who benefits and who burdens from different projects. And this is something that is kind of this amorphous tool that's really meant for community engagement and dialogue. So just to Ms. Lucas's and Courtney's previous points, something that I think the benefits and burdens question, I think is really a meaty one that we can all, sorry to the vegetarians and vegans. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a great discussion. Okay, so Zach, do we have you here? Turn it over to you for community innovators. Hey.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for having me. My name is Zach Waickman. I'm the Biodiesel Lab Manager at Loyola University School of Environmental Sustainability. This is a position I've had the pleasure of having for the last 10 years or so. I got involved initially with sustainability projects at the university when I was an undergraduate student, and it just so happened that the project I helped start was a biodiesel project at Loyola that grew into kind of a hands-on experiential learning program that we run now. We run a small biodiesel manufacturing facility right on campus. So this is done in the School of Environmental Sustainability. all of the fuel that we're making, the biodiesel fuel, is made from used cooking oils. So we collect the used cooking oil, not only from our own cafeterias at Loyola, but we actually collect almost all of the used cooking oil from universities and museums throughout Chicago. So most of them are feeding into our oil collection network. We work with a great partner in the city of Chicago, Green Grease Environmental. They help go around and pick up this used cooking oil from our partners. They do some initial filtering on it and they bring it back to us at the university to start our process. It wasn't always that glamorous. When we started, I think we had a garden hose and a bucket, and I was mouth siphoning oil out of a dumpster into a bucket. So we all start somewhere on these projects and we build them up to something bigger. So I think that's what a lot of what we're here to talk about, right? Is these bigger innovation pieces that we can all hit on. So after that used cooking oil gets to Loyola, then really the students take over. We have student on-campus jobs and internships, research positions, class projects, volunteers, a ton of ways for our undergraduates to get involved in this project. And I'm really there to help facilitate this and empower those students to take ownership of this, to innovate, to kind of keep pushing our project forward to continually improve not only the quality of the product that we're putting out, but also our overall sustainability goals. Our primary overall sustainability goal, and I'm gonna quick share my screen here, see if I can pull this up. Our primary goal is to be a zero waste production facility. This is something that we've been working on really since we launched this project in 2008. So there's a lot going on here. I totally get that. But the key that this is kind of describing is, right, we're starting with this used cooking oil from our oil collection network in the upper left-hand corner. And it goes through all sorts of different processes and procedures and refining in order to come up with a whole bunch of different products. And that's what's listed at the bottom. We don't actively make or market a lot of these products. These are just different things that the students have come up with, right, with their different innovations at looking at our waste products. We try to, as much as we can, think of them as true byproducts. It's only a waste from that single process, right? So when we're making biodiesel, biodiesel is a direct replacement for petroleum diesel fuel. When we're making that, our main byproduct is glycerin. So glycerin's got 10,000 different uses. It's great stuff, but that's really pure glycerin. We've got like the glucliest, whatever other made up word I can come up with right now, just really low grade glycerin. And so we went through the process of looking at, well, why is it so low grade, right? What's it contaminated with? As we were looking at what it was contaminated with and started profiling it, we did the very scientific, arduous process of crossing off the word contaminants, and we wrote the word ingredients, and just kind of turn around, right? What does this make? What are all these ingredients to? Well, it turns out that all of those contaminants, except for one, were ingredients in making soap. Awesome. Now all we had to do is focus on getting that one contaminant out of the glycerin, feed it into a research and development process, which led by the students. And now we produce all the hand soap that's used for the university. We're making that all in-house. So as we're looking at this zero waste process, we want to ensure that we're turning all of these, waste products and byproducts into usable, sellable goods.
Oh, you timed yourself. Way to go. I was trying to.
I know, yes. You caught that. So we want to turn this all into usable, sellable goods. We want to keep it as hyper local as possible. So if I can keep it in my lab, that's the best. If I can keep it in my building, awesome. On my campus, in my community, in the city of Chicago. Nothing that comes in and out of our lab is coming from outside of Chicago, is leaving the city of Chicago, right? And our primary output, right, is the biodiesel. So biodiesel, direct replacement for petroleum diesel fuel. It works in existing diesel engines and infrastructure. Downside, it freezes. So in Chicago, what a bummer, we freeze sometimes. we all live here, so this isn't news to anybody. But there's some.
Yeah, thank you. Any final words to tie up?
Yes, so it's just really cool. There's great new innovative products coming online. Hopefully Loyola is going to be demonstrating some of these soon, where we can be using 100% biodiesel on existing buses with very small modifications. They're doing this in some other cities with really cold weather with great success. So we're hoping to bring this technology to Chicago.
Nice, thank you. And now we're over to Rick for the super cool thing he has going on too. Rick, all you.
All right, thank you. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, my name is Rick Rosen. I'm going to talk to you today about something maybe a little bit different from what some of the other folks have talked to you about. Tricia asked me to talk to you today about, well, the company I work for, called LanzaTech, obviously here, and the role that they have in the renewable, the cyclic carbon economy, and specifically about sustainable transportation fuels. Now, as I think many of the folks have mentioned, that we are having a massive electrification in our transportation grid. And a lot of this is driven by the energy that is carbon-free in the form of solar and wind. But for many of the fuels, specifically jet fuel, and for many of the materials that we use every day, plastics, rubber, textiles, we need a source of carbon. And what I want to talk to you today about is the idea that we have a choice where that carbon comes from. It can come from the environment that we already have, or we can continue pulling it out of the ground. And this is going to determine our climate future of the choice that we make of where the carbon comes from. Now, imagine, if you will, a process where you take industrial off-gas, nasty stuff, and you can actually transform that industrial off-gas into the kind of things that we use now. You're going to transform it into transportation fuels. It can be transformed into rubber, textile, plastics. Now, imagine also if not only this process can take industrial off-gas, but it can take CO2 directly captured from the air that through what's called direct air capture and actually feed into the same process. But the real beauty of this is, now imagine if we can also feed into this process the waste that we generate. Tremendous amounts of agricultural waste and municipal solid waste. And this is what's called now the circular carbon economy, where carbon comes from many different sources, all present in the environment now. It can be manipulated into the things that we need now, and we can keep the carbon in the ground. I'd like to spend just one quick moment on the centerpiece, because this is the LanzaTech technology. LanzaTech has a technology that can take industrial off-gases, nasties, carbon monoxide, poisonous, hydrogen, explosive, CO2, with many of its own problems. It can take all of those nasty gases, and it actually turns these gases into ethanol. And the way it does this is it does it by what we call by a gas fermentation. And the process is really not all that different from what happens in a brewery. In a brewery, yeast eats the sugar and produces ethanol and makes us beer, right? The other thing, but in this case, we have a gas fermentation where bacteria actually eat all of the nasties and produce ethanol. Now, and so the pieces of this circular economy are falling into place every day, every year. This is not an idea. This is not an experiment. This is not a demonstration. This is real. It's happening now. And let me go to the next slide. This is a photograph of our first commercial process. This is a process, it's in China. It takes the off gas from a very large steel mill, and it produces about 46,000 metric tons of ethanol per year. In the 3 years of operation, this plant has has stopped the emission of over 125,000 tons of CO2. That's a big number. To put this number in perspective, 125,000 metric tons of CO2. That is the amount of CO2 that would be emitted by over 500 flights of a 747 from New York to London. That's a lot of CO2. This is not, and
Rick, just
again,
a 1 minute, sorry to interrupt, 1 minute warning.
this is not a dream. This is a commercial reality. We have the first plant started up. We're in the process of starting up another 2 plants. You probably saw my meeting announcements. We are also starting up another plant. This is what these plants look like. These plants are large. We're talking about a lot of ethanol. We're talking about a lot of gas. This is going to be started up in Ghent, Belgium. It will be started up by the end of the year, and it will produce even more bioethanol, producing even more, mitigating even more CO2 that is discharged into the air. But let me talk really quickly about transportation fuels. Ethanol is great. You can do a lot of things with it. But one of the things that you have to do is you need to make jet fuel, right? Electric planes are a long, long way off. If a plane's going to fly, it needs hydrocarbons. But again, where that carbons comes from, we have a choice. LanzaTech has also worked on a process that takes ethanol. It produces a range of jet fuel and diesel. And again, I want to stress, this is not an idea. This is not an experiment. We have gone and we have made demonstration quantities of fuel. Virgin Atlantic has flown a flight on it. And you see here our CEO, Jennifer Holmgren, with Richard Branson when the flight landed in London. ANA is also using our fuel for many of the transports of its aircraft.
Cool. Anything just to tie up with, Rick?
I just want to say that, you know, fuels are great, but the frontier for all of this circular economy is to be able to take this carbon that's captured and to put it back into the useful things that we all use and we all touch. Textiles, rubbers, plastics, that is the dream of this circular economy. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That's circling it back to our first town hall where we talked about waste, and it's all just coming together about how all interconnected all these issues we work on are. Thank you so much. So Trisha, I think we had a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, Rick, do you want to show your last slide while we're talking? Because it's kind of shows the circular.
Yeah, this is, again, I wanted to just come back to this. And as I say, this centerpiece is real. It's happening now. All of these steps, these are all happening. This is also a process that's happening now. The pieces are falling together for this circular economy. Again, this is not an experiment. This is commercial. It's real.
So thank you, everybody. I also wanted to talk about a little bit about the circular economy, a little about process, and I'm gonna ask Vig. Vig, you mentioned that you were interested in collaboration, and there's an opportunity for community to consult. And EEC loves to create models. And you mentioned that Edgewater is kind of a model transportation hub in a way because we have such great transportation access. And 2 things: are there grand plans for Edgewater that can we create a grand vision to link to TODS and CTA stations? And then the other question is, how can we give community feedback before these grand visions or even little visions are realized? What is that facilitation process, or how can we help you do what you do?
Sure. So I think when it comes to grand vision, I like to think about it, it's like silver, it's not a silver bullet, but silver buckshot. You know, all the little pieces of what we've talked about today, right? Upstream, downstream, behavior change, infrastructure, community building. And so, you know, from time to time, CDOT will do like a neighborhood plan, usually triggered by some kind of like external impetus, like large land use change or transition in the neighborhood. I think probably the best way at the moment for people to get involved locally is largely through the board office, because we do need people. Something that Courtney said was really good, actually, I thought was talking kind of, the incommensurate nature of like safety versus convenience or expediency versus comfort. And so we do need people in the community talking amongst themselves with the ward offices about that, right? Moving beyond modalities to really what are the experiences that we value, right? We want our streets to represent our values, and our values are, it's not about bicycle, car, bus, but it's about I value whatever, right? Safety for my children, or, space so that I can, participate in my local economy on Andersonville, and there's, a bench to sit at. I would also say, reach out, right? To Deloris's point. I hope you're still there. Your email did make it to me actually about 130th Street. And so I expect some follow-ups from CDOT. So do reach out.
That was her shout out.
Oh, great.
Hey.
That's great. No, because it's important to hear. And as I mentioned earlier, we do rely on people to be our eyes and ears, and share those experiences, and that does help build the will and interest for projects.
And then I have a question thanks, Vig. I have a question for everyone. Is there one ask that we should, to your point, should be asking our alderman, or ask Vig while he's here? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what should we be asking if anyone here on the panel wants to put if you haven't already, what we as a community, Edgewater Environmental Coalition, and individuals, what should what should we be resoundingly asking for? Maybe we'll have to come back to that.
I'll jump in with my current favorite.
Go ahead.
I feel like it depends on the day and what's going across my mind. But the one that I saw recently was cities and neighborhoods, not in Chicago or Illinois, I don't think, but voting to not allow any new gas stations. That we can have convenience stores in different ways, that the future of fueling is going to look different. And we don't necessarily need to continue encouraging congestion with more convenient fueling. So just stop the gas stations.
I think we should have a child audit of our streets, like asking people who are under 10, people who are under 15, what their experience of our streets are like, and the kind of things that they would want to see on our streets. I'm not around a lot of children, but I personally be just like a sponge in that environment. Like, tell me more. What do you want to see? And how can we as adults who may have a little bit more power and sway over the elected officials, how can we support their vision for what our streets can be? One last thing, in the 49th ward, we have participatory budgeting, and I would love to see participatory streets. What should our street look like? Should 20% of the street be reimagined, be reallocated for something other than storing your car there for 23 hours out of the day, or 22 hours of the day? What are other things we can be doing with our streets?
I have one more question about accountability and Deloris's, Cassie's point of accountability and Deloris's point of following up. Once a contract happens, how do we make sure the contract or the project is fully realized after? EEC has been looking at the contract for the new lights that are supposed to have dimmers. How do citizens advocate for complicated contract or work on complicated contracts like that? Or even we had in the chats, after something is already done, like Lawrence and Lake Shore, the bike infrastructure took space from pedestrians rather than cars. How do we like retrofit things after they're already realized that the community doesn't really want, or even maybe CDOT doesn't want anymore?
I'm trying to come up with the best answer. I think the way to think about this is we're kind of constantly reiterating, particularly with some of these quick improvements. You know, a lot of times we want to get something out there, paint and post, and find the way to do it. There are a lot of design criteria. You know, I was familiar with the Lawrence and Lakeshore Drive, and you know, thinking in that particular, not to bore everyone, in that particular case, you know, a lot of motor vehicles are trying to get onto Lakeshore Drive, and so we tried to pull the cycling, you know, far enough away to the south so that people turning right have a good visibility of a bicycle coming, you know, at a higher speed east-west, to avoid any conflicts there between motor vehicles and bicycles. But we always upgrade. You know, many of our protected bike lanes that either started as paint and post, we've upgraded, you know, on Milwaukee Avenue to concrete. You know, we've upgraded traditional bike lanes to buffered bike lane. And so sometimes the initial project is the proof of concept, or that's, you know, what we can put together based on maybe where the community sentiment is. But then once the ridership takes off, you know, once people see, oh, this is actually good, it allows us to do the next iteration and, you know, come in with different materials and you know, cement it, so to speak, in a literal way.
Well, thank you so much for sticking around. We did so good on timing on the other ones, but last one, we just had to get those last 10 minutes in. We'll send a follow-up email to all the attendees and loop all of us presenters and innovators in together so we can keep these conversations on technology innovation and streets innovation, in many cases what we were talking about going on. And Trisha, you want to take us out?
Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us and being here, and really from bicycles, children on bikes, to rocket fuel. We've covered it all. So we really appreciate you all being here and helping to make our space more livable and our transportation more livable as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
We really appreciate it.
Claps all around.
Good night.